We're going to be discussing the Congressional Budget Office and its appropriations request. CBO has become so much a part of this institution that we may take it for granted. But we should remember what a key role CBO plays in helping Congress effectively exercise the power of the purse assigned to us by the United States Constitution. Before CBO was established in 1975, Congress largely depended on the executive branch for budget and economic analysis and for estimates of the cost of proposed legislation. With CBO, Congress has its own independent source of cost estimates for legislation, assessments of the President's budget proposals, and projections of the future path of spending, revenue, and deficits. We need to protect and strengthen that capacity. The CBO budget request we're discussing today calls for a $2.8 million, 5.6% increase above fiscal year 2019. Virtually all of that is for personnel costs. In addition to covering normal pay raises, the requested increase would allow continued modest growth in staffing levels to help keep up with CBO's heavy workload, strengthen analytic capacity in key areas such as healthcare, and continued efforts to make CBO's work as transparent as possible. The subcommittee has highlighted the need for transparency in CBO's estimates and analysis, and I believe CBO shares that objective. For example, in recent years, CBO has been making more underlying data and details of its economic and budget projections publicly available. It has been publishing more information about its models and methods and more analyses of the accuracy of previous projections. These all are welcome developments, and I expect we'll be hearing more today about future plans in this area. I should note that the appropriations committees are the source of some of CBO's heavy workload, and we need CBO's help in making sure our bills add up to what they're supposed to, and we need CBO cost estimates at each stage of legislative action. I'm told that our committee gets great support from the people at CBO who do appropriations, scorekeeping, including work on nights and weekends and on short notice. We appreciate that, and I'm certain other committees similarly appreciate the people at CBO and the work they do. Our witness today is Keith Hall, who was appointed CBO Director in 2015. Previously, Dr. Hall has held a number of other positions in government and economics, including as Chief Economist at the International Trade Commission and at the Department of Commerce, and as head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. He holds a PhD in economics from Purdue University. As an Ohio guy, we won't hold that against you. Before Dr. Hall testifies, I want to first say thank you. I've been here, this is my 17th year, and CBO in modern debates has been tossed into the middle of the pit, and unnecessarily so. But even when there are disagreements, I think what you've done in the past few years to open it up and to have the level of transparency has been extremely helpful in the process. Not that you won't take political arrows. We're all living in D.C. in 2019. But I want to personally say thank you for that. I think it's an important step, and I look forward to hearing your remarks here. But before we go to you, I want to turn to my ranking member, offer her an opportunity to make an opening statement. Ms. Herrera Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to welcome you, Mr. Hall. I look forward to hearing your testimony. As the chairman alluded to, I think CBO is, I haven't been here as long as you. Was your hair brown when you came many moons ago?
Black. I just saw a picture. I said, who was that guy?
Who's that young dapper gentleman?
Exactly.
So CBO has been a part of a lot of my legislative work since I got here. This is my 5th term. So I look forward to getting the chance to sit down and hear your testimony about needs that you have, and hearing a little bit about what goes into your cost estimates. And I know that you're requesting an increase this year for additional staff. I know that in the previous years you've been focused on being responsive to member requests and making sure that you're able to get through analysis quickly. And so I welcome you. I have questions for you about probably some issues that you're going to be familiar with, and look forward to hearing more about how we can help you as you serve the institution.
Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Herrera Butler, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present the Congressional Budget Office's budget request. And thank you also for your longstanding support of CBO. That support has allowed us to provide budgetary and economic analysis that is timely, thoughtful, and nonpartisan as the Congress addresses issues of critical importance. The primary purpose of my testimony this morning is to request an appropriation of $53.6 million for 2020. That amount is an increase of $2.8 million, or 5.6% from the amount provided in 2019. The increase is largely aimed at accomplishing two main goals. The first goal is bolstering responsiveness and transparency. Last year, the Congress increased CBO's budget to put in place a multi-year plan to increase our capacity to make its work as transparent and responsive as possible. As a result, we are increasing staffing in high-demand areas, such as an analysis of healthcare and immigration. And in addition, we are continuing to hire analysts to expand our use of team approaches, in which work on large and complicated projects is shared. In 2020, we propose hiring additional staff who would increase our expertise and modeling capability in several areas. CBO's goal is to have more staff with overlapping skills within and across teams. And in some cases, those skills will consist of expertise related to particular programs, such as transportation. In other cases, they will become more technical, such as the ability to design simulation models. Increasing the number of staff with overlapping skills will allow us to be more nimble when responding to requests for information. Building on the strong foundation we have established over many years, with additional resources, CBO will undertake many different activities to make its analysis transparent. For example, during the next 2 years, we will testify about our projects and analytical methods, and will work to resolve issues raised by Congress. We will publish more overviews and documentation of some of our major models and more detailed information, including computer code, about key aspects of those models. We will release data in many forms, including an interactive product to help users obtain information about our estimates of the distribution of household income. We will use a new format for our cost estimates to highlight key parameters, as well as information needed by the Congress for budget enforcement procedures. We will continue to evaluate previous estimates when possible in order to improve future ones. We will publish several reports about uncertainty in our estimates. We will experiment with creating visual summaries of some of our major reports, as we did in our most recent Budget Outlook report, and we will interact daily with Congress to explain our estimates and obtain feedback and continue to regularly obtain advice from outside experts. The second goal is to continue our high volume of output. In 2018, we published more than 900 formal cost estimates. We completed cost estimates for nearly all bills before a floor vote occurs. We also provided the appropriations committees with numerous summaries and account-level tabulations for appropriation bills. We provided technical assistance to congressional staff as they developed thousands of legislative proposals and amendments. And we published many reports about the budget, the economy, and related issues. Those reports included our assessment of the 10-year budget and economic outlook, a report on the long-term budget outlook, an analysis of the President's budget, a 300-page report describing more than 100 options for reducing the federal deficit, monthly budget reviews, and a variety of analytical reports that examine particular federal spending programs, aspects of the tax code, and budgetary and economic challenges. Most of those reports were written at the request of the chairman or ranking member of a committee or subcommittee, or at the request of the leadership of either party in the House or Senate. But we know that members would like us to do even more. So to achieve our goals, to continue a high level of output and bolster responsiveness and transparency, CBO requests an increase of $2.8 million. About $1.5 million, a little more than half the proposed increase, will go towards funding for a full year for 14 additional staff members that we've already brought on board during the last fiscal year, as well as 6 additional hires in the fiscal year 2020. That would bolster our total FTEs from 255 planned for this year to 264 next year. The other 1.3 million would cover a small increase in our employees' average salary and benefits to provide merit-based pay raises and keep pace with inflation. With your support, we look forward to continuing to provide timely and high-quality analysis to Congress. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, sir. Believe you guys shrank a bit earlier in the decade. And I know you're trying to rebuild, and that's part of the request. What was the distribution of the workload when you guys were squeezed? We hear these stories of weekends and nights and all of that to try to get things done, and we're very appreciative of that. Can you tell us how you dealt with that?
Sure. We always have a problem with peak load issues. You know, a topic becomes hot, a bill becomes active, and we only have so many experts we can throw in on it. So lots of times folks have to expect the work over the weekend and et cetera. The thing we try really hard to do, and I think we do this very well, is sort of do our due diligence. We take the time to think something through. We talk to experts and et cetera, and sometimes that can be frustrating for folks that are waiting for us.
Yeah.
And it can push our work over weekends, but we're sure to do that. And now that we're trying to be more transparent and more clear in our writing up of things, that again takes more time. And you know, we can anticipate some of it. We're trying to add people in certain areas. The past year or two, we've been working. Our healthcare team has just been working flat out, and had way more work than we could possibly do. And those folks are just. It's unusual to give them the weekend off at times.
Wow.
But we deal with it. We try our best to anticipate, and that's part of what we're trying to do now.
Are these straight salary people, so they come in and work? They're not getting any overtime.
That's right. That's right.
I didn't even need you to answer. I saw everyone's expression behind you. They're not good poker players, I'll tell you that. Ms. Herrera Butler? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, in response to your comments about being responsive, I wanted to ask a question about HR 1. And this is something that I've had several colleagues weigh in with me on and ask. So it was introduced on the first day of this Congress, which was about 7 weeks ago, and has 227 co-sponsors, and the Speaker has publicly stated her intention to schedule a floor vote on this legislation later this month. I think it's being marked up this afternoon. And you were sent a letter by Ranking Members Davis and Womack last week that in part read, quote, "All members of the House are very familiar with elections law, procedures, and regulations. Members on both sides are obviously interested and concerned about this encompassing legislation and what it could mean for their individual districts and states. From the 6-to-1 taxpayer donation matching system to the My Vote voucher pilot program, there are numerous provisions identified that could easily have long-term implications. So my questions are, when is CBO going to release a formal cost estimate of HR 1, and has your team shared with Congress a preliminary cost estimate for HR 1, just given the implications here?
I do think we're going to be able to meet demand and have things ready for the vote. It's been that was the topic we were working on this last weekend, as a matter of fact. We've spent a lot of time on it. One of our challenges almost always is, and it is with this bill, is the language changes.
As it's going.
As it's going along. And, you know, we really spend more of our time sort of with informal discussions and talk about changing language, which I guess I'll call technical assistance. And we've done quite a lot of that, even if we don't have a formal estimate yet. And so getting the language sort of finally nailed down and narrowed down is sort of always a challenge for us in getting that done. And I think we should be able to do that.
When you say informal conversations, who have you had those conversations with?
I don't know offhand. It's almost always it's the committee of jurisdiction, the committee or the leadership that's drafting the language. I don't know off the top of my head.
So the ranking members on the committees of jurisdiction, have they been privy to some of these? Have you been able to informally brief and update?
Right. Yeah, a lot of that depends upon the committee staff, whether they want us to work confidentially or not, because it's sort of work product. So a great deal of our work is done confidentially. And we have a practice of once specific legislative language at all becomes public, then we make all our estimates after that public. And once we get the formal language and get a formal estimate, we will be sure that we get the information around and tell folks. We have probably had some real conversations back and forth with the committee majority as they craft the language, though.
And I understand there is a sensitivity to if I'm working on legislation with my ledge staff, you want to get it as ready for prime time as you can before you release it out to the public. I completely understand the need for discretion. I think my concern is that when you're asking for help with manpower to do these enormous Herculean tasks, this has obviously been probably going on for 7 weeks. I don't doubt that you picked it up 2 weeks ago and were like, oh, this is huge. We have to work over the weekend. I'm sure your team has been dedicating a lot of time to this. It's hard then to come back and think, well, how? So you're saying on one hand you want to be responsive and you want to be helpful, but if we aren't going to have any information about this until it's being marked up, you can imagine why then it's hard to, why CBO gets put into the middle of political fights, quite to be totally frank, right? Because kind of feels like, well, this is all taxpayer money.
Right. Well, we are somewhat at the mercy of Congress. If we're doing work for committee.
I pity that. I just right there.
And they ask us to do it confidentially. We do it confidentially, but with the understanding that if language becomes public, we can't do that. So we're trying our best to create a level playing field, while at the same time doing a lot of confidential work. And that's what I get phone calls about
so
sometimes.
Can I ask, and this will probably be my last before Chairman moves on. With that, so the language itself and the proposals they're public. That's where I think I'm a little hung up.
Right.
It's not private information that someone waited to release. This has been part of press releases. It's been part of talking points. Right. It's been heralded as a political shift, right? Which is the prerogative of any majority. That's not what I'm debating. What is my question is once those proposals have been made public, as you just said, why then isn't it open to all members of Congress in terms of the financial estimate? That's my issue.
Sure, and it's a matter of specificity. We have to make a judgment as to whether the language is public, is specific enough, and really is what we're working on. And then we make that sort of pivot. So lots of times you'll hear discussions of aspects of a bill that are being considered, but they don't make it into the final language. And so we aren't necessarily even.
Which means you can't obviously provide a full, comprehensive, formal review. I understand that. But I think that would also give you the opportunity to have informal conversations over major titles that you know that have been released, that are publicly available, that are not being kept confidential. I mean, I can flip open and go through like 7 titles, and probably all of it won't be in there. But I can tell you there's probably some pieces that have been part of talking points at press conferences that are going to stay in there. And I would ask that you would consider that once it's been made public by whoever is sponsoring it, right? I'm not asking you to do something inappropriate. That you are at least having those informal conversations with the ranking members as well. I think that would be my request.
Okay. Yeah, well, we'll see what we can do. But we're still, we're still sort of caught in between a little bit. And I get calls from members who are upset about not knowing what we're working on, or we can't pivot to their work because we're busy. We can't even tell you what we're busy on. So I've heard this before, and I'd love a way out of the trap, sort of.
Well, I think it's a good precedent to say if whoever it is going to talk about it and put it in open source, then and if it's something that taxpayer dollars are being funded for you to do, then I think it does behoove you to be open with the members of Congress who ask you about it. I don't think you then have the opportunity to gatekeep that. You can say this may end up in it, may not. If someone says, hey, this is open source, this has been brought forward, in terms of transparency, I can see why that would frustrate someone to say, well, it's that people are using it at press conferences. Can't you provide at least the information you have on, I'm sure to date you have information about it. You can say, well, full disclaimer, this might not end up in the final bill, but I'll give you what I got. Does that make sense?
It does, but it is a little bit of a danger to us to have us
It is.
quoted back on a number that we've changed
Yeah, yeah.
in the middle of the
Yep.
process. And parts of bills interact with each other in unexpected ways sometimes, so it's not always. so
Oh, I'm
easy to-
familiar. I'm familiar.
But I understand your concern, and we'll continue to try to do what we can to create a level playing field and talk about our estimates when we can.
Is this a straight chronological, we got this request on this date and we start moving on it, versus the Speaker of the House is prioritizing this bill as H.R. 1? Does that trump, to continue with my card-playing references here, does that trump the chronological request?
Well, it kind of does. We set our priorities. We talk to the committees of jurisdiction and ask them, what should we be spending our time on? And so we do let them do that, and sometimes they do change priorities in the middle and that sort of thing. And to be honest, it's hard to just sort of say we get a bill and we start working on it, because we could be talking for years about pieces of this legislation and talking about how we view this and that. So we have this sort of foundation of work over time. It's part of why I emphasize that so much of our time, probably more of our time, is probably spent with these sort of informal technical assistants, just talking, than it is on the formal estimates where we start, where we sort of get that language and here it's final and that sort of thing.
Around campaign finance, how many people do you have working on that? It seems to me, you're talking about healthcare, you're talking about immigration, you're talking about the economy, you're talking about taxes.
Right.
I can't imagine you have many people.
No, well, we'll have a team. I would guess it's at least 3 or 4 main people. But one of the things that we do is we have assistants who help, and then we have a review process. So where things get touched by a lot of people to make sure we're being objective, we've been complete. So the number's probably larger who will touch that eventually on its way out. And if everything passes by my desk as well. So if you think about even something fairly simple, a lot of people wind up having some impact on it. But we can't, as I'm sure you know, we can't just sort of create expertise. We've got to have those people there, and it takes our analysts a couple of years to become really expert in their areas. And so this is part of what we're trying to do, is we're trying to create more overlap so we can, rather than get caught with one person carrying all the weight on something, we have several people who are helping, and we have some assistance.
In that regard, let me ask one quick question before I go to Mr. Newhouse. With the budget request, who would you hire with regard to topics? You know?
Yeah, we try to have a broad range of topics. 80% of our folks have advanced degrees. So our budget analysts typically have master's degrees in public policy, and we'll bring them in, for example, somebody fresh out of school, and they'll specialize in an area and learn the legislation, learn who to talk to, that sort of thing. But we have 80 budget analysts covering the entire waterfront. So seems like a lot of people, but when you consider all the topics, it's not a lot. And we just try to anticipate. We have to have everything covered because we never know what's going to happen, but we anticipate there'll be more things in immigration. We might try to add some.
So you're just adding bodies, not necessarily saying, okay, we want to get, of the full-time employees, we want 25% to go to healthcare. You just want bodies, and then you'll figure out where they go based on what the demands are.
Well, that would be true for budget analysts, yes. We also have a large number of PhD economists who have an expertise that's not so fungible.
Okay.
So we'll have areas that are covered, and they'll be helping out with developing the modeling and doing some of the.
And that's part of the request?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Newhouse? I like your gray hair, by the way, just for the record.
Wasn't always.
I know the story.
I'm still trying to get my head around you being here 17 years. You started when you were 12.
Pretty close.
Well, welcome, Dr. Hall. Appreciate you being here and bringing your team with you to talk about your budget needs for the year. CBO is one of those organizations. If the numbers come out with something that you're in favor of, everybody loves them. If they don't, well, maybe the opposite could be true. So it's a tough position to be in. I think you guys are in the position of, you tell me if I'm wrong, just calling balls and strikes, right? You're not, it's a very impartial place to be. And so take my questions in that light. I want to help you improve that. You talked about it, transparency. I appreciate your efforts there, and maybe we can talk more about those things to improve transparency so members feel as though everything is available to them when they need it, and all those things. I'd like to know a little bit more about some of the specific reasons that models are used in decision-making, what that process is like when what would or not be a factor when you analyze a bill. And let me give you an example of what I'm trying to get to. For instance, and the chairman said you've been thrown into the pit, and that's absolutely accurate. You're at the center of a lot of the arguments. When you analyze the House version of the American Health Care Act last year, your estimate included people who would be willing to choose to forego the coverage that they were mandated to purchase under the Affordable Care Act, even if they couldn't afford it. In the total number of people who would lose insurance under the new bill, it also included individuals on Medicaid that would voluntarily leave the free coverage that they were receiving due to the repeal of the individual mandate. So the bottom line is, I'm sure you know, your study deduced that the health care bill would cause 23 million fewer people to have health insurance, including that number, 14 million who would not buy the insurance if the government stopped fining them for it. And since the repeal of the individual mandate, that in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid released their own estimate for insurance coverage reduction. Not 23 million, it was 2.5 million people in 2019. Of those, the majority are expected to be somewhat younger and healthier than those who retain coverage. So this is obviously a drastically different number than your original estimate. And then on top of that, it comes after an overestimated number of individuals who would sign up for coverage under the Affordable Care Act in the first place. So given all of that, and the unique role that you have of just calling balls and strikes, but you can influence through what your work is, policy making, it's certainly important that the numbers are reliable. So I'd like to just ask about that, some of the reasons specific models were used, what led to the analysis to be, I guess you could characterize being so inaccurate, and what steps are you taking to ensure that going forward models are going to be more accurate so that we can all have confidence and all feel, that we're getting a fair shake here.
Sure. Well, first of all, there's a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison because our 23 million was over a 10-year period, and a lot of that change in coverage came from Medicaid expansion ending. So it wasn't just the mandate. Also, well, a few things. We were working on a 2017 baseline. The Budget Committee asked to use that instead of the more recent baseline. So there's a fiction already going on a little bit because we were using a little bit of an old baseline. We fundamentally differ, I think, from the CMS in thinking that the mandate affects Medicaid enrollment. We think the mandate does encourage people to look for coverage, and then they discover that they're eligible for Medicaid where they didn't know before. So we do fundamentally differ with them on that. They don't seem to see much of a Medicaid impact. And in terms of, I could go on a bit about our differences in estimates, but keep in mind the mandate penalty has been gone for only 2 months, right? So we're going to see this year exactly how many people do drop coverage now that the mandate penalty is gone. So in terms of our accuracy, well, we'll see how that works out.
The jury's still out, you're thinking?
Jury's still out, and it'll take a while to get that data in. We have changed our thinking on it a little bit. I mean, we did lower our estimate of the effects of the mandate at some point. The modeling that we've done has been, let me just make one thing, important distinction. We do use models, but the most important thing is our analysts. We have people who think this through very carefully. They talk to people, et cetera. The model is just sort of one tool that they use. So we're not just all dependent upon the model. But that is something that we pay attention to. What it's worth, we have just finished updating the healthcare model. First time since it's been created. The model we've been using is something called HiSim. We've got something now that we're calling HiSim 2.0. It's just now online. So we'll see what sort of difference that makes. I think certainly the new model will make us more flexible and more able to do different estimates faster going forward. But you're right. Projecting stuff we have differed with other folks. We've been more or less accurate over times with this. Part of the issue, certainly with the mandate, to be honest, is things change. And a lot of things change. Publicity change. The news has changed. And that affects people's view of things and their willingness to go and sign up for healthcare changes. And we can't always predict that. But we don't want to be right. We don't want to be wrong on things. We do assess how we're doing and try to correct things. We do it every year. We adjust our baseline. So we take it seriously when we're off. And we do try to correct it. We've been adjusting our healthcare estimates all along.
What would you say to some that have been critical of the CBO, even going as far as to say that they should no longer exist?
Keep your language clean when you answer.
So just to...
Well, I just say, projecting things is hard.
Yeah.
Right? Projecting the future is hard. We do it in a very, as much as we can, we do it in an objective, non-biased fashion. I think we're very good at it on the whole. There are instances where sometimes projecting things is very hard, and when it's hard, we're not as accurate. I think healthcare, the ACA was very hard. It was something new. So other things are less hard. So we plug along. I think we do as well or better than anybody in a lot of things. I certainly don't think we did a bad job. We've done a bad job on the healthcare, but I do think that's been a really tough lift, is to forecast that accurately, because there are just so many things that make it complicated. This is part of what transparency is important to us about.
Yeah, that's what it kind of boils down to.
Yeah.
So that we understand the processes you're using,
Yep.
and maybe even understand the weaknesses and the strengths of those processes, so we know where to have more or less confidence in the outcomes.
Yeah, we've done reports. We've done a few presentations at CRS about exactly how we estimate healthcare, do our healthcare estimate. We've done that for staff a couple of times, or at least once, maybe twice. So we're going to try to keep doing that work. We're going to try to communicate about our uncertainty. When we say, 23 million, there's a lot of uncertainty in that.
Yeah.
Right? And that's just our best estimate. It could be higher, it could be lower. We try to communicate that. But that's a challenge for us.
Yeah.
And to use a terminology, it's not just a matter of unknowns. There's unknown unknowns sometimes when you're forecasting. Mm-hmm. And we don't get to beg off. We don't get to say, oh, that's too hard. Mm-hmm. Right? We try to give you our best estimate and try our best to communicate.
But you footnote that too, kind of recognizing the unknown unknowns, right?
No, I'd say one of the things we did, which really should be noticed, is we've redone our healthcare model. We've made probably a dozen presentations to experts on our model as we are developing it. So there are now a lot of people who understand exactly what our new model does, how it works. We've had input from a lot of people. So this has been a very transparent process in arriving at a model which will be a tool for future things. But this is sort of the challenge of dealing with an uncertain future, is trying to be more transparent about it and taking the time to do that. I can tell you, for example, when we did the healthcare, the ACA estimates, we would have been working on a new model if we hadn't been working on those estimates. We had our all hands on board working on those estimates. So it's delayed things because we've been busy doing the work as opposed to setting aside and redoing the modeling. So it's this balance of challenge of things.
That sounds like the lumberjack that doesn't have time to stop and sharpen his saw.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a fair analogy. That's right. And, you know, we have probably, 40 people in total who deal with healthcare, but that's a lot of topics in healthcare.
Yeah.
And we're working all out. We do our best to actually talk to outside experts and get their views on things.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of interest in having confidence in the CBO numbers, and I think that transparency, people understanding the processes you are using, and like I said, maybe understanding more where the relative strength or the confidence that you have in particular predictions would be helpful too.
And we're looking for input. When we talk about transparency, we're doing a lot of things in transparency. We'd like to know what works and what doesn't work. You know, what Congress finds helpful and not so helpful. That's part of what we're doing. We're trying to make business decisions about which axis to sharpen and that sort of thing as well. But it's a process, and you know, we don't crave the attention on this.
It's inherent in your job, I mean.
But it's inherent in our job, and we know we do work that Congress relies on, and it's important work. So, you know, we're looking for whatever help we can get in helping us focus on what we should be doing.
All right. Good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You got it. Along those lines, there's a bill that would require CBO to publish all the data, models, computations, assumptions used in preparing each cost estimate it issues, and do so in a way that would allow outside experts to replicate the cost estimate. Is this feasible?
It just isn't, unfortunately. We've taken a track where transparency it's a lot of things. This focus on the model, we understand some of the focus on the modeling, but that's just one aspect of transparency. And one of the problems is, one is analysts do the work. It's not, we're not slaves to the modeling, so there's only so much help models can give. But second is we have lots of models. If we had to put up every model we used, and we got 200 plus models, some of which are time, we would have almost no time for anything else. So it's a matter of priorities, which is sort of why we've taken this track of, rather than just focusing just on the models, we're focusing on a number of things and trying to make good business decisions about which things will be more useful to Congress. Not to say we're not producing some code from our models. It's the models that are used a lot and that we're likely to use again in the future. We're trying to focus on that sort of thing. And then another aspect of this bill, which is really would be really a concern for us, we use all sorts of confidential data. We're calling up people. Sometimes it's even business confidential data. And if we made that public every time, we would have real problems getting the data in the future. So we have lots of constraints on something like this. You know, I agree. I've always agreed with the idea that transparency is important. We want to be more transparent. We just want to do it, like I say, with some smart business decisions. This feels a little like being over-regulated if you're a company. You know, where it's going, in my mind, too far with the modeling and not enough in some of the other aspects.
One of the issues that came up earlier was the health care bill, and I remember back when we did the Affordable Care Act, one of the issues was the inability to project cost savings around prevention. Can you explain to me, that was a pretty frustrating time. You know, we're going to have more screenings, we're going to have more birth control, we're going to have more this, we're going to have more that. And obviously, you know, an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure, but we couldn't find that information out. Can you tell us why?
Well, first of all, the easy part, or the easier part, is knowing how much the government's going to spend on it. We can get that down. The part about how much is saved from prevention, we do try to take that into account. What gets frustrating is we look at research, we look at evidence. We don't want to just assume that. And so when we do an estimate, we really do try to make an estimate of the net cost. So we do try to take into account the effects of prevention, that sort of thing. One of the frustrations, I think, for people is a lot of things seem like they would save more money than they do. You can treat a lot of people, and the ones that the treatment works on, there's savings, but you're treating a lot of people, right? So the cost is still there. So we have to net all that out, and we're constantly looking for evidence. If we get some good evidence, some research that's relevant, and shows some savings, we will take that into an account. I think part of it as well is we can take the savings from prevention into account, and it still doesn't mean that something pays for itself, right? That's a pretty tall order for something to actually pay for itself, even if it does have some savings involved. One example I can think of, it was a while back, that something actually paid for itself was some anti-smoking stuff. That actually paid for itself because the prevention. But there are very few other things we've encountered since then that where the prevention has such an impact that it outweighs the spending cost to the federal government.
So you're doing screenings, but you're doing screenings for everybody, and maybe a lot of those people weren't going to get anything anyway, and you are catching it for a certain cohort,
Yes,
which you're able to.
that's exactly right. That's almost always an aspect of trying to take this into account. It's something with opioids. If treatment helps somebody with opioids, that person is really there can be a lot of savings, but it's got to reach. It's what percentage of the people get reached by that we have to take that into account, and that gets to be a hard lift sometimes.
So you do have the information, you just can't really project the savings. Can you?
We try to.
This particular treatment works,
Right, but our starting point has to be, it works for how many people versus how many are treated.
Right.
So we do look at that and try to take that into account. One of the things I think can be frustrating a little bit too, right? So much medical research is helpful, but it isn't always directly applicable to our issues. We've actually now done a few things, which I really think we should continue to do more, is we put out blogs now of talking about where we could use some more research that would help us take this stuff into account. We did one on obesity a few years ago, for example. We talk about what the evidence is and why we aren't able to give more credit towards programs that help with that. And the idea is to try to encourage research. And we like to hear about research. If there's some research that you think we should take into account, we will listen and talk to those folks and see what we.
I don't want to jump ahead of HR 1, but I do have a couple of requests. I mean, one is that I think is coming more and more online is the adverse childhood experiences, and how these ACEs have a significant impact on long-term health, addiction, all of the antisocial behavior.
Right.
And I think we got to get our arms around that, because it's gonna take some early investments to try to prevent some of that. So we may be coming at you with that. Last question I have, that we talked a little bit with the architect of the Capitol, is trying to find ways to fund the legislative branch, especially the bricks and mortar projects, with some level of creative financing. We had a couple of examples around cogeneration with the power plant, and more of a PACE program where you get some upfront money from the gas company to put the retrofits and all of that, and then you yield the savings in the long run. I don't know if you have any ideas on how we would be able to creatively finance some of these. Longworth building's going to be over $1 billion. Rayburn renovation's going to be over $1 billion. The longer we wait, the more it's going to be.
Right.
I don't know if you have any ideas. I'm just kind of tapping into your
Well,
expertise here.
I'll try to
or if you have any money. I mean,
Yeah. I didn't expect that.
Yeah,
this
well,
year.
yeah. You know, I'm not going to let you just ask me for money. We're going to ask you for money.
Well, the budget generally is done on a cash basis. And you know, there are some things we do on an accrual basis, credit programs, we do that way. So, but for the most part, it's a cash basis. And when it's something like what you're talking about, if there's a commitment, even though the government may be renting something, if there's a commitment to rent it, we have to treat that as a commitment. So when we do a budget estimate, that all gets wrapped into the cost. So it doesn't necessarily look all that different with the different creative financing things. But we can certainly talk to you a little bit if you
We
like.
could get the money up front, right? We could get the project. That's what I'm concerned about, is getting these projects done and then fine, paying rent, lease, whatever, down the
Right.
line. I mean, I don't know how you do that with the Rayburn building.
Right.
I mean,
No, I mean, in our cost estimate, we would reflect that. I mean, we would reflect that. We do an estimate, we do it over 10 years, so we would characterize the upfront money. We'd talk about it on a cash basis when the money goes out and that sort of thing. As to whether that winds up saving money or not,
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, my estimate, well, I don't know if it would or not, but it would get the projects done. I would think it would save money in the long run, because if we wait, the longer we wait, the more expensive everything is, labor, material, all of that.
Right.
Is there anything in the budget, this will be the last question. This is a very elementary question. The federal government owns all of this property, right? We own these buildings, right? It's the federal government's property.
Right.
Capitol, Longworth, Rayburn, Ford, all of these. But we don't get any, is it just general assets? Are they counted as assets to the federal government is that part of what we borrow off of in general?
Yeah, you can do it that way. That's right. If you just own them, they really, and since they don't have that much of an impact on the budget because there's no cash
Right.
going in or out.
But if I had a house I owned, I'd get a home equity, and I'd go out and borrow money and redo my house or add something on. But we can't do that, right?
Well, we
We can't say
yeah.
I mean, if we sold the Longworth building to a developer, what would they pay for that property? I'm
Right,
exploring this
right.
with you. I don't have an answer, but I would imagine it would be a lot of money.
Right, and that would have budgetary impacts, and we would make an assessment of the incoming money when that happens on a cash basis. I don't know that we don't do it, but there are probably some estimates out there about how the value of what the government owns.
I mean, we probably wouldn't look as poor as we are now, or the deficits wouldn't look as bad, or the debt wouldn't look as bad if we took into account the assets of the federal government.
Well,
I'm
that,
just trying to understand
Sure.
if that's even counted. Does that even
Yeah,
factor
no,
into
no,
anybody, like
yeah, no,
our
it's
own
not even-
budget or the long-term debt?
no, it
and
doesn't
something?
really play into what we do. Now, one of the things we do when we talk about the debt and the deficit, we do it as a share of GDP to put context in it, right? Because GDP gives you some idea of the ability of the economy to generate
Right.
income that the government can rely on. We do that, and we try to put that into context and not just talk about the raw numbers. But we don't do a lot of talking about the value of the assets of the federal government until they're sold. And then,
Yeah. I'm glad there's no press in here saying the congressman wants to sell, the chairman wants to sell off all the assets. We'll be cleaning that one up, huh? You tweeted that out? Yeah, there you go. I thought you were my friend. You were never getting 30 minutes to ask questions again, I'm just going to tell you. Well, we appreciate you and your team. Thanks for coming up and showing up here, and we'll take a very close look at your request, and we've got a lot of demands this year, which your requests are part of the challenges we got to struggle with. And but we do want to say thanks to you and your team, and please let everybody know back at HQ that we're very thankful for all their work, and we rely on you. And I just think, lastly, that this whole idea of having a strong legislative branch that's independent from the executive is essential for us, and we know you're a big part of that. So happy to yield. You want?
Can I? and-
Sure,
and I don't
sure.
know that I'm not trying, I don't want to extend the hearing. But I may want to connect with someone further, just regards, in the last number of months, I've gotten a lot of different information about how even hearing this talk about modeling, like use a lot of different models and analysts use it. And I don't know that our answer can be back to the public, well, they use a lot of different models, so then we can't make it open, open and transparent. That doesn't sell.
Right.
So there probably will continue to be more interest in that, and the bill that the chairman mentioned, I have a lot of interest in as well. And to that, I just with regard to the general, we talked a lot about healthcare, the economic outputs and where we're at, and the projections I'm seeing out of CBO based on, and they're revised slightly, but if you look backward and then you look forward, you have underestimated economic growth at times, right? And so we're seeing with the big piece of legislation that passed 2 years ago, the tax cuts bill. I'm just curious about, as you are putting out updated forecasts, because I assume you are, because GDP is continuing to grow, incomes and continue to grow, the revenue forecast is changing. While it's a delicate dance for you, and it is not a perfect science, the more that you can make your methods public, the more we're going to be able to trust and rely on the hard work that I know your smart folks are putting into this. Part of my challenge is I get into an issue and there's so many different competing. So the economy is growing or it's not growing. It's hard to even answer that. And we are reliant upon CBO to give us good information. And then when you have another, even a quasi-government organization contradicting that, you guys are the economists. You said the PhD, economic forecasters. So it is really, I think, for the future of this organization to continue to do and serve your mission, you're going to have to find a way to become more transparent. It's going to have to be demonstrated. It just will, I think. And so that's one of the things that, as you're asking for budgets to grow, we want to provide that because we want you to do your work. We don't want your poor folks to, turn out with the color of hair that Chairman Ryan has, right? But we need that change. I don't know, I'm mine, so. But we need that.
Let me just say, we do a fair amount of self-assessment. How have we done? How accurate we were last year? And I can say, maybe it's worth mentioning, our budget outlook we just produced, 10-year. In there, we tell you exactly why we've changed our forecast, how much of it was economics, how much of it was new legislation. When we give an economic forecast, we tell you what everybody else is forecasting as well. So you put it right into context. So we try very hard to be transparent. A lot of that is sort of buried in the
It
report.
is, yeah, and it's really fun to read through there with a highlighter trying to find it.
But we're always willing to come and talk about this.
Great.
I've never turned down an offer to come talk with a member.
Great,
So, and would come and talk about anything if you like.
wonderful, we appreciate it, and I thank you, Chairman. And your hair looks great today, by the way.
Thank you, and I'd like to say, Mr. Hall, I like your gray hair as well, so we're...
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, yes. Yes, sir.
Do I have 30 minutes like you?
You got 30 seconds.
I just wanted to follow up. Dr. Hall said he'd be willing to come and talk to any member at any time. Would like to talk to you more about the use or the non-use of dynamic scoring. I've got an article in front of me about the president's budget last year, and it makes some assumptions on economic growth due to tax changes, and whereas CBO doesn't necessarily take those into account. So it comes up with different outcomes.
Right.
And so I'd like to have a longer conversation about that if we could. And also, in your testimony, you have, one of the topics is analyzing the accuracy of the CBO's estimates. You're coming out with some reports analyzing your hits and misses, apparently. Certainly interested in seeing that, and I think that would be interesting for a lot of people to see. And just for the record, I want my beard like his.
I know.
I am happy to adjourn this hearing.